Good afternoon, folks. We're going to get started here in just a moment, but I did want to alert you early on that we are going to have a presentation accompanying the 1 month and 3 month precipitation and temperature outlooks discussion. So I wanted to go ahead and give you that website address. It's out on our Missouri River Water Management information page. I will announce that link later on in the call, but did want to at least give some of you the opportunity to get to that link. The link is www.nwace.army.mil/rcc/index.html. And on that page there is a Missouri Basin Climate Outlook link, and that is where the presentation resides. So let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for our third Missouri River Basin Water Management Conference Call for 2014. I am Michael Coffey, and I will be moderating today's call. These calls are recorded in their entirety. Your participation acknowledges your consent to be recorded. We're going to be using a forced mute function during the call. To unmute your line during this call, enter *6. Please be aware that the function does not work on all phones, and that if it's not working on your phone, others can't hear you, so if you could keep your conversations to a minimum. Also, after you finish speaking, if you would hit *6 again, mute your phone, I'd really appreciate it. So for today's agenda, we're going to have Dr. Dennis Toddy, who is the South Dakota State Climatologist and Associate of Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering at South Dakota State University. He'll talk about the 1 month and 3 month precipitation and temperature outlooks from the NOAA Climate Prediction Center. We'll also have on the phone today Mr. Scott Doomer with the National Weather Service's Missouri Basin River Forecast Center. He's going to be talking about the latest potential outlook for flooding along the Missouri River Basin this spring. Mr. Brett Budd, Chief of the Systems Restoration Team for the Omaha District, will be discussing 2011 flood repairs. The Systems Restoration Team is responsible for the repairs of damages to the main stem dams and levees caused by the 2011 flood. Also on the phone today, we will have Ms. Kim Thomas, Chief of Omaha District's Readiness Branch. Kim will be providing an update on the status of Omaha District's preparedness for this year's spring runoff. Also on the phone, we have Mr. Judd Knieven, who is the Chief of Kansas City District's Readiness Branch, and he will be providing an update on the status of Kansas City District's preparedness for this year's spring runoff. Finally, we have Ms. Jody Farhat, Chief of the Missouri River Basin Water Management Division. She's going to be providing an update on current reservoir operations, and two of her team members, Mr. Kevin Stam and Mr. Joel Novzinski, will be discussing the Corps' runoff forecast for 2014 and the planned regulation of the reservoir system based on the current runoff forecasts, respectively. So before we begin today's call, I'd like to do a roll call for this afternoon's speakers. Dr. Toddy, are you on the line yet?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Scott Doomer, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Brett Budd, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Kim Thomas, are you on the line?
I'm here.
Judd Knieven, are you on the line? Judd? Jody Farhat, are you on the line?
Hey, this is Judd. I'm here.
Okay, great, Judd. Thanks. And Jody, did I hear you?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, Kevin and Joel are also with you?
Yep, they're with me.
Okay, that's great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Dr. Dennis Toddy will talk about the 1-month and 3-month precipitation and temperature outlooks from the NOAA Climate Prediction Center. Again, for those of you who would like to follow along with Dr. Toddy's presentation, it is located on our website at www.nwdace.army.mil/rcc/index.html. Dr. Toddy, would you go ahead and get started, please?
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is enjoying the beginning of warm-up here across the spring. We're going to start off with some kind of a quick outline and then run through a few maps to kind of give an overview on current conditions and what our outlooks are saying. So for those of you following along with the presentation, the key points when are referring to current conditions. Currently, we're in a neutral ENSO condition. We are not in El Nino or La Nina. We'll talk about that more in just a second. In the outlook, there's been a change to that situation, but for most of the spring, the impact will be neutral conditions for us. We'll talk about snowpack on the plains, which is fairly limited overall in the current situation. In contrast, the mountain snowpack, the Corps will talk about more details on that, but as of last, I think the number was around 130% of average currently. So kind of a contrast in our snowpack situations from plains to mountains. We do have some deep frost in various areas of the basin, which could have an impact if there were to be any heavy precipitation until the frost goes out. Generally, recently we've been colder in the plains and also drier in the plains overall. Precipitation over the last 6 days has been below average. We'll talk about that, while mountain snowpack, as we mentioned, has been picking up. Looking ahead, the predictions are likely indicating cooler conditions into April and possibly throughout much of the rest of the spring, more likely in the eastern parts of the basin. Precipitation is not well defined across the area. We'll talk about that briefly, but probably near average to maybe slightly below average precipitation would be the way we'd lean right now. The mountain snowpack, its direction is, we don't have a good indication on that, but it looks like it'll probably continue accumulating at this point. And as we get into summer, after the runoff season, El Nino will become more of an issue at that point. So let's go on to slide 2, kind of a review of our current conditions. So last 30-day maps over, this is showing the northern plains and central plains area from Colorado, Kansas northward. In the upper left-hand side, you see the departure from normal, departure from average temperature across the basin. And you can see generally everything east of the divide has been below average over the last 30 days, as it has throughout much of the winter. In parts of Montana down into the east or into far western South Dakota, running 3 to 6 degrees below average. But northern Montana into the eastern Dakotas, we've been running 6 to 12 degrees below average, much below average for this time of year. On the lower right-hand side, we have the percent of average precipitation for the area. The colors that are in the red, you see over most of the Dakotas, that dot in north-central South Dakota, I think, is a bad data point. So most of the Dakotas are running below average precipitation, most of the area less than half of average, and some less than 25% of average. So that is why we've not had much in the way of plain snowpack. As you look further to the west, heading toward the mountain areas, you see much above average, which is why we're seeing more heavy accumulation in the mountainous areas. Go ahead to slide 3. This is a map. I should indicate those previous maps were from the High Plains Regional Climate Center. This current map of the mountain snowpack is courtesy USDA NRCS in Portland, and shows pretty well the areas in Montana and Wyoming, the blue areas that drain into the Missouri River. The kind of tealish colored are 130 to 149% of average in those basins, and a few basins here and there with greater than 150% of average. This is snow water equivalent for this time of year. So we've seen an uptick in this, and the Corps will address this a little bit more in some of their runoff forecasts. Going on to the next slide, showing you the current plain snowpack. This is from the No Risk group out of the Minneapolis area. It's the NOAA group, and it shows the contrast very well across the plains states, where you can see this is the total SWE in the basins areas. The light gray from Montana, Wyoming into South Dakota is from this most recent snowstorm, but we have less than an inch of SWE available from that. Probably will not produce too much runoff, too much additional runoff, other than what we're going to get out of the little bit of melting snow. You do see in central North Dakota a bit of carryover snow cover, and there's still some snow cover in the eastern Dakotas. But the eastern Dakotas one and in part of North Dakota will drain down through the James. The James will be a little bit slower reaching into the Missouri River system, and then the Big Sioux will also be dumping some additional water, but those are downstream of the reservoirs. So most of our snow melt is going to come below the reservoir system. Let's go ahead and go to slide 5. Now we're looking at the outlooks. These are the temperature and precipitation probabilities for the third week of March. These are from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. On the left-hand side, we have the temperature outlook. The blue area throughout nearly the whole basin indicating more likely below average temperatures as our pattern of cold continues from the winter. More likely this northwest flow pattern out of Canada will continue in a modified format, keeping conditions more likely cold overall. We will begin to warm. We will begin the snow melt throughout certainly the plains areas, but it will be slowed somewhat by overall colder temperatures. On the right-hand side, the green area, we're looking at precipitation now. Eastern Montana to North Dakota has above average chances for precipitation during this time period. Note that these are probabilities of precipitation occurring, not necessarily amounts. So the situation right now is one that with this northwest flow, we will continue to have smaller precipitation chances, but really we don't see in the offing big precipitation events throughout certainly the plains areas. If we go on to the 3-month outlook, you'll notice that I'm skipping the 30-day outlook, and that is because the last issuance of the 30-day outlook was at the beginning of the month, and since we're nearly halfway through the month, we're kind of echoing something we've talked about already in the 8 to 14 day. The new outlooks, the 8 to 14 day is updated every day. The new outlooks will be issued next Thursday, so we'll be new ones at that point. But getting some advance notice on those, looks like the outlooks as they are now are going to be continuing in the same fashion. So here we're looking at March through May, indicating the blue with the eastern part of the basin having chances of staying cooler than average. The EC white area is equal chances for below or above average as we go through the spring. On the precipitation side, there's EC equal chances over the whole basin. But if we stay in this northwest flow pattern, at least for the time of the spring where we expect to have snow, this northwest flow and air out of Canada does not tend to be a big snow producer for the plains. It still will add snow to the mountains likely that will run off, but the plains areas would not expect big snowfall events. And then as we get into the convective part of the latter part of the spring, we'll have to see how this plays out. But right now we're not expecting big precipitation events overall. Going on to the next slide, the current drought update. The U.S. Drought Monitor shows over nearly the whole upper basin, really no status on the U.S. Drought Monitor. Still some drought carryover from dry soils into Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota into some of the drainage areas in the upper Missouri. And the seasonal drought outlook indicates likely some improvement in those through the spring just because of typical spring precipitation events. Okay, just a rehash of the key points. Mountain snowpack, very little plain snowpack, colder likely to continue, and then our ENSO condition will be transitioning probably to El Nino, but that will not be occurring until the summer or possibly into the fall. There'll be more on that as we go along. That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you so much. Scott Doomer, are you on the line still?
I am, thanks. Can you hear me? Great. Good afternoon, everyone. The National Weather Service issued its second spring flood outlook last week, projecting an active but not an exceptional spring flood season. Snowpack conditions in the mountains can be generally categorized as above to well above average, with snow water equivalents running approximately 120 to 150% above average. By this point of the winter time, we usually have accumulated about 85% of the seasonal pack, our seasonal snow water equivalent in the snowpack in the mountains. The March water supply forecast, developed by the Natural Resources Conservation Services and collaborated with the National Weather Service, was issued yesterday. This most recent water supply forecast suggests an above-average mountain snowmelt runoff season in 2014, with mountain snowmelt runoff volumes basically running between 120 to 130% of average. Though we have an above-average mountain snowpack, the National Weather Service at this time does not expect significant flooding due to mountain snow runoff alone. The National Weather Service is projecting minor flooding in the Bighorn, Big Hole, and North Platte basins due to expected mountain snowmelt runoff. There is currently widespread but very shallow plain snowpack, and we've actually pretty much lost almost all of that now, doing the recent weather here in the northern plains. However, the lack of the snowpack is only part of the story. We still have had wet soil conditions going into the winter, coupled with extremely cold temperatures, and that has resulted in deeply frozen ground condition across much of the northern plains, as Dennis had mentioned as well. Long-range forecasts developed by the National Weather Service this past week suggest the likelihood of minor to moderate flooding this spring in portions of the Dakotas and northern Iowa. This is not atypical and will be a function of any late winter plain snowpack or early spring rain we receive during the remainder of the season. Convection drives flooding in the lower third of the Missouri Basin. The latest projections indicate the likelihood of minor to moderate flooding in Missouri, southern Iowa, and extreme Kansas due to springtime rains. In fact, we have already experienced some moderate flooding in late February in northern Missouri due to rain on previously snow-covered ground, and this is typical. Higher than normal stream flow conditions in the fall, coupled with an unusually cold winter, has led to ice formation on many of the streams and rivers within the Missouri Basin. Ice jams have been reported along the Bighorn, Wind, Gallatin, Niobrara, North Platte, and Platte rivers thus far this season. Warm temperatures over the past weekend have resulted in numerous new incidents of ice jam flooding throughout the northern and western area of the Missouri Basin. Reports of major flooding due to primarily the ice breakup, coupled with some lower elevation snowmelt, is now ongoing along the Bighorn River in Wyoming. Moderate flooding is also being reported along the Musselshell River in Montana. The Tongue River in Montana is also having minor flooding. The North Platte River at North Platte is currently influenced by ice movement. The Cannonball River and Little Muddy Creek in North Dakota currently have high stages due to snowmelt runoff aggravated by the ice jamming. The Little Missouri River in South Dakota is also running high, primarily due to ice blockage, and it has been a very active ice jam season, and ice jam flooding will continue to be a threat for the remainder of the winter and early spring. The National Weather Service will continue to monitor river response to the mountain and plain snowmelt as we progress through the 2014 season. National Weather Service headquarters will provide the 2014 National Hydrologic Assessment press briefing on Thursday, March 20th. Thank you, and this concludes the National Weather Service Flood Potential Brief.
Scott, thank you so much. Brett Budd, are you still on the phone?
I am. Thank you, Michael.
Brett, take the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Repairs from the 2011 floods of the operating projects, including the 6 Missouri River main stem dams, are progressing very well. The Omaha District has awarded 55 construction contracts worth over $208 million for the repair efforts of the operating projects. We have completed 25 of the 55 contracts, and another 8 contracts are more than 95% complete. Overall, the repairs are 49% complete. The ongoing repair efforts will not adversely impact our ability to provide flood control and water regulation throughout the next flood season. Going state by state, in Montana, at Fort Peck Dam, the $35 million contract to make repairs at the plunge pool at the end of the emergency spillway chute continued through the winter. The contractor is currently installing anchors to the existing concrete walls and is also stockpiling concrete aggregates. Later on this summer, the contractor will begin placement of the roller compacted concrete as part of the permanent repairs. The Omaha District awarded an $8 million design-build contract for the inspection and repair of the 16 emergency spillway gates at Fort Peck. Last year, the contractor inspected all the gates, including non-destructive testing of the wells, and is currently completing the design of the repairs. Early next month, the contractor will mobilize to the job site to begin the repairs, which include weld repairs, replacement of the gate seals and wire ropes, and repainting of the gates. A follow-on contract to repair the emergency spillway slabs will be awarded later this spring. In North Dakota, at the Williston Levee, in 2012, the Omaha District completed a $12 million repair contract to restore the levee crest to its original elevation and to repair and restore the tow road. In 2013, the district awarded an $8 million contract for a relief well installation. The installation of the relief wells are complete with just the installation of the outfall pipes and reseeding remaining, which will be completed early this year. At Garrison Dam, the Omaha District awarded an $18 million design-build contract for the inspection and repair of the dam's 28 emergency spillway gates. The contractor is completing the inspection of the gates, including non-destructive testing of the wells, and is completing the designs for the first gates to be repaired. The contractor will be mobilizing later this spring to begin those repairs, which include painting, wire rope replacement, weld repairs, seal replacement, and other minor items. A $4 million project to repair the powerhouse on West Terrace Drains is 85% complete, and the contractor will remobilize this spring to complete those repairs. A $2 million project to repair the gates at the regulating tunnels is 60% complete, with work progressing through the winter and into the spring. A new contract will be advertised in the very near future to complete repairs of the emergency spillway slabs. Repairs at the levee and causeway at Fort Yates is substantially complete, and the contractor will remobilize early this spring to complete the repairs. In the state of South Dakota, at Oahe Dam, the Omaha District has a $7 million design-build contract to make repairs to Oahe's 8 spillway gates, including painting, weld repairs, seal replacement, and other minor items. The contractor has completed an inspection of the gates and is finalizing the repair plans for all 8 gates. The contractor will mobilize later this spring to begin those repairs. All other flood repairs at Oahe Dam have been completed. At Big Bend Dam, the Omaha District awarded a $5 million design-build contract for the inspection and repair of the dam's 8 emergency spillway gates. The contractor is completing the inspections of the gates, including non-destructive testing of the welds, and is completing the designs for the first gates to be repaired. The contractor will be mobilizing later this spring to begin those repairs, which include painting, wire rope replacement, weld repairs, seal replacement, and other minor items. All other flood repairs at Big Bend Dam have been completed. At Fort Randall Dam, the Omaha District awarded a $17 million design-build contract for the inspection and repair of the dam's 21 emergency spillway gates. The contractor is completing the inspection of the gates, including non-destructive testing of the welds, and has completed the designs for the first gates to be repaired. The contract also includes replacement of the dam stop logs, which are used to hold back water upstream of the gates to allow the gates to be raised and repaired. The contractor will be mobilizing later this spring to begin those repairs, which include painting, wire rope replacement, weld repairs, seal replacement, and other minor items. Work will begin this year on a $7 million Phase 2 spillway slab repair project at Fort Randall. At Gammons Point Dam, the Omaha District awarded a $12 million design-build contract for the inspection and repair of the dam's 14 emergency spillway gates. The contractor is completing construction of new stop logs that will allow the inspection of the gates. Once the inspection of each of the gates is completed, the contractor will begin preparation of detailed design for the repair of each of the gates. The contractor will begin repairs early this summer to include painting, wire rope replacement, weld repairs, seal replacement, and other minor items. All other flood repairs at Gammons Point have been completed. For additional information or updates, to the Omaha District webpage under the Flood 2011 Repair link. Thank you, and back to you, Michael.
Okay, thanks so much, Brett. Kim, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
All right. Good afternoon. Just a couple of quick updates on some requests we've been receiving here in the Omaha District. We've received technical and direct assistance requests from Montana, Wyoming, the Crow Tribe, and the Northern Cheyenne Tribe. We've had 5 flood fight engineers on site since last Friday. providing technical assistance to several communities along the Bighorn, the Little Bighorn, and the Musselshell rivers. In Wyoming, we deployed 2,000 linear feet of HESCO. There was a major ice jam on the Bighorn near Gray Bowl. We do have a federal levee in that area. The ice jam has since broke and dissipated downstream, but that federal levee really did its job up there. We only had a few feet of freeboard left on that at the height of the ice jam through there. In Montana, we deployed 200,000 sandbags to Fort Harrison to pre-stage those. We're providing technical assistance to the ice jam on the Musselshell. We have a team in Roundup today. And we provided 4,000 sandbags each to both Northern Cheyenne and Crow tribes, and had a team there on the ground yesterday checking critical infrastructure. We do have all of our flood fight training complete throughout the basin, and last week we had our annual meetings with all the state emergency management offices and are currently prepared to respond to any additional requests. And that concludes my report for today.
Okay, great, Kim. Thank you so much. Judd Knieven, are you still on the phone?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
All right, good afternoon. Hey, Kansas City District, we're preparing for any potential flood season. Right now we're in really good shape. We have a well-trained staff from the previous year's flooding. We're very well stocked with flood fight supplies and equipment. We have 4.1 million sandbags on hand, 35 pumps and 5 sandbag machines. We maintain contracts for additional flood fight equipment, so we're very well prepared there. This month and next month we'll be conducting flood fight training throughout our area of responsibility, and coordination with sponsors continues. From 2013, we had 10 levee rehab projects. All but 2 of those have level of protection restored, and the damages that occurred are flood fightable if they have not been repaired yet. The 2 levee systems that had overtopping breaches are the Jacobs levee and the Tebbets levee system, which are both located east of Jefferson City, Missouri. We expect to award a contract for both of those systems at the beginning of April. That concludes my report. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Judd. Jody, are you and your team ready?
We're here.
Okay, great.
All right. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today for this 3rd Missouri Basin Outlook conference call of 2014. We appreciate your participation and look forward to working with you in the coming months. Following the 2011 flood, the Corps' Northwestern Division committed to better communication with congressional delegations, states, tribes, and stakeholders, and this call is part of that effort. Flood control remains our primary consideration as we move into 2014. However, drought persists across much of the lower basin, and storage in the Missouri River Mainstem Reservoir System is well below normal due to the 2012 drought. We've heard a lot of stories in the news over the past week or so about the potential for flooding this spring. However, you've just heard the National Weather Service's spring flood outlook describing essentially a normal flood risk this year, with minor to moderate localized flooding expected as a result of snowmelt runoff and ice jams, and the typical minor to moderate flooding in eastern Kansas and Missouri that's seen almost every year as a result of thunderstorm activity below the reservoir system. Runoff in the Missouri Basin comes from 3 sources: plain snowpack, mountain snowpack, and rainfall. It's important to remember that the 2011 flood was the result of high runoff from all 3 of these sources: widespread heavy plain snowpack, much above normal mountain snowpack, and record rains over a large portion of the upper basin. Currently, only one of those 3 conditions exists today, the above normal mountain snowpack, so a repeat of the 2011 flood is highly unlikely. Last week, we posted the March runoff and reservoir regulation forecast on our website, and now I'll ask 2 of the senior engineers in my office to describe these studies in more detail. We'll begin with Kevin Stom, who will discuss the updated 2014 runoff forecast, and he'll be followed by Joel Konopchinsky, who will discuss the planned regulation of the reservoir system based on the current runoff. Then I'll come back on the line with a few closing remarks. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Jody. The updated 2014 calendar year runoff forecast is 30.6 million acre feet which is 121% of normal, above Sioux City. The increase since the February forecast is due to greater than predicted February runoff and an increase in the March-April runoff forecast due to wet soil conditions, frost depths, and the potential for above normal precipitation. A rise in mountain snowpack contributes to an increase in runoff expected during the May, June, July period. Current drought conditions have shown limited change. Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota are mostly drought-free, while the majority of Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa have improved the past year to abnormally dry to severe drought conditions. Based on the Climate Prediction Center's calculated assessment of soil moisture conditions, plain soils are much wetter than normal in much of Montana, Wyoming, and western North Dakota and South Dakota. Furthermore, frost depths are much deeper than normal this year due to much colder than normal winter temperatures and a lack of snow cover. Because of the wet soil moisture conditions and deep frost depths, there is increased potential for above normal runoff in these areas from snowmelt and spring rainfall. Plain snowpack was considered light throughout the upper Missouri River Basin. Most of the shallow snowpack had melted as of March 10th, though some snow persists along the northern and eastern boundary of the upper Missouri Basin. Snow water equivalents in these locations ranged from 0 to 2 inches of water equivalent. There is still potential for additional snow accumulation in the plains through early spring if winter storms enter the basin. Mountain snowpack as of March 7th was 127% of average for the headwater basin above Fort Peck, while it was 135% of average for the Garrison subbasin, based on the 30-year average. In both basins, mountain snowpack has already exceeded the 30-year average peak accumulation. However, it has not yet peaked. Normally, by March 15th, 87% of the eventual peak snowpack has accumulated, and it normally peaks around April 15th. The CPC's climate outlook, as discussed by Dennis Toddy, indicates continued cooler than normal temperatures in the northern plains, with increased chances for below normal precipitation in the eastern Dakotas. The extended outlook through May still indicates colder than normal temperatures in the northern plains and equal chances for precipitation. In summary, an increase in mountain snowpack and an increase in projected runoff due to wet soil conditions and frost depths have led us to adjust the 2014 calendar year runoff forecast to 30.6 million acre-feet, or 121% of average. The forecast and a detailed description of our forecasting methodology has been posted to our website. Thank you.
Okay, Joel?
Thank you, Jody. The reservoir system storage is currently at 50.9 million acre-feet, or 5.2 million acre-feet below the top of the carryover multiple use zone. This 5.2 million acre-feet of storage is in addition to the 16.3 million acre-feet of flood control storage that was available with the start of the runoff season. Gavin's Point releases are currently 14,000 CFS. Releases will be stepped up beginning around March 17th to provide flow support for the 2014 navigation season. The navigation season will open on April 1st at the mouth near St. Louis. Garrison Dam releases averaged 17,900 CFS in February. Releases were reduced from 18,000 CFS to 17,000 CFS on Monday and will be stepped down to 16,000 CFS in mid-March. Ice conditions in the Bismarck area will be monitored closely during the thaw, and additional adjustments to Garrison releases will be made if conditions dictate. Moving on to the monthly studies, the basic simulation uses the runoff forecast that Kevin just discussed. Due to the amount of variability in precipitation and other hydrologic factors that can occur over the next several months, we also develop an upper and lower runoff that are then used in the upper and lower basic simulations. These simulations provide a range of reservoir elevations and releases that may be expected under the different runoff scenarios. The discussion to follow will focus on the basic, or most likely, runoff forecast. Information on the other runoff simulations is posted on our webpage. Looking at the upper three reservoirs, under the most likely forecast, Fort Peck Reservoir is expected to peak near elevation 2236.3, or 2.3 feet into the 16-foot flood control pool, which extends from elevation 2234 to 2250. Peak releases are expected to average about 9,000 CFS this summer. Garrison Reservoir is expected to peak near elevation 1845.0, or 7.5 feet into the 16.5-foot flood control pool, which extends from elevation 1837.5 to 1854.0. Peak releases are expected to average about 26,000 CFS this summer. Oahe Reservoir is expected to peak near elevation 1610.2, or 2.7 feet into the 12.5-foot flood pool, which extends from elevation 1607.5 to 1620. Peak releases are expected to average about 30,000 CFS this summer. The navigation service level is used to determine releases from Gavins Point Dam to support navigation and to help provide an 8 to 9 foot deep navigation channel downstream. The navigation service level at the start of the navigation season is based on the March 15th system storage check. We are now within a few days of March 15th, and it is very likely that flow support for navigation will be approximately halfway between minimum and full service. Flows for this level of service are designed to provide between an 8 and 9 foot deep navigation channel, with Gavins Point releases expected to range from the low 20,000 CFS to low 30,000 CFS this summer, depending on downstream conditions, and releases will be reduced in response to downstream flooding. However, the effectiveness of the reservoir system to reduce peak stages along the lower river diminishes as you move downstream due to the travel time. The service level for the remainder of the navigation season and the navigation season length are based on the July 1st system storage. Under the basic forecast, flow support for navigation would improve to full service, and it would be for the full 8-month navigation season. The forecasted energy generation at the main stem dams for 2014 under the basic simulation is 8.9 billion kilowatt hours. With normal reservoir levels and releases, we would expect approximately 10 billion kilowatt hours. Thank you, and back to you, Jody.
Okay, so in summary, runoff is forecast to be about 30.6 million acre-feet this year, 121% of normal. Runoff of this magnitude is expected to occur on average once in every 4 years. To put this in perspective, runoff in 2011 was 61 million acre-feet, nearly twice as much as is being forecast this year. The upper three reservoirs, which contain nearly 90% of the total system storage, are still drawn down significantly due to the 2012 drought. There's currently 5.2 million acre-feet of space available in the conservation pool that will be used to capture a runoff this spring, increasing the total flood control capacity of the system by about a third. Even with the increased runoff forecast this month, we do not expect the reservoir system to completely refill this year. System storage will rise into the annual flood control and multiple use zone this summer, but will fall back into the conservation zone later in the year as we make releases for navigation and other downstream uses. Mountain snowpack is currently at about the same levels as this time in 2011, but well below the peak snowpack levels seen in 1997 or 2011. We would need an additional 7 to 8 inches of snow water equivalent in the mountains to tie the 2011 peak snowpack. And there's little to no plain snowpack at the present time, although, as Dennis mentioned, we did pick up a little bit of snow across Montana and South Dakota yesterday. And the soils are wet and deeply frozen, so any snow melt or rain that we get will likely run off into the reservoirs, and we've accounted for this in our runoff forecast. We'll continue to monitor the conditions in the basin, and we'll make any necessary release adjustments as the spring unfolds. And one last thing. Our spring public meetings have been scheduled for the second week in April. Meetings will be held in Kansas City and Nebraska City on Tuesday, April 8th, in Pierre and Bismarck on Wednesday, April 9th, and at Fort Peck on Thursday, April 10th. The regular Basin update call that we had previously scheduled for that week will be moved to Friday, April 11th. It'll be a call similar to this, but it will also be open to the public for those who were unable to make it to one of the public meetings. That concludes my remarks. We'll go back to you, Michael. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that concludes all of the presentations. We are going to now open up the lines for questions. We'll field them by state. So if you have questions for the Corps, Dr. Toddy or Scott Zoomer, if you'll wait until you hear your state called out, again, *6 to unmute your line. Okay, we'll start with the state of Nebraska. Do we have any congressional delegation members on the phone who would like to ask questions? Do we have any tribes or state officials, local government, Nebraska press? Okay, state of Wyoming. Do we have any congressional delegation members? Tribes, state officials, local government, Wyoming press.
Michael, we might want to remind folks to hit *6 to come off mute.
Yeah. *6 to come off mute again. Okay, state of Kansas. Any congressional delegation members? Any tribes or state officials? Local government? Kansas press? Montana? Montana congressional delegation members? Montana tribes? Montana state officials? Local government? Our Montana press? North Dakota? Congressional delegation members from the state of North Dakota? North Dakota tribes? State officials? Local government?
This is Laura Ackerman from the North Dakota State Water Commission, and we just have personnel in the field to try and determine. It looks like there's something that could be going on at the Washburn gauge because it's going down when the Bismarck gauge is going up. So we have personnel out. That's all we have to report.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. We'll be watching that as well. This is Jody.
Okay, we'll go on to Missouri. Missouri congressional delegation members. Missouri state officials, our local government. Missouri press.
This is Marshall White at the News Press in St. Joe.
Hi, Marshall. Go ahead.
Had trouble getting on today.
Oh, sorry about that.
Jody.
Yes, Marshall.
You do not see any likelihood of a repeat of 2011 this time?
I do not.
Can you talk about what you mean by normal to moderate flooding?
That's the National Weather Service forecast, and I think particularly down in your area, in Missouri, some of those areas along the river and along the tributaries get some minor to moderate flooding nearly every year as a result of thunderstorm activity. And so I think, and we can go back to Scott and ask him to verify, but I think what we're talking about is the normal type flooding that folks down in your area would see in any typical year. I guess, Scott, do you want to add to that at all?
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly right. In any typical year in the southern third of the basin, which is, eastern Kansas throughout Missouri, we get minor to moderate flooding largely due to just the frequency and the intensity of the thunderstorm activity and rainstorms that come through the area that time of year. So it's nothing that doesn't happen very often, or it happens quite often, minor and moderate flooding. When we say minor flooding, we're talking about river levels that have minor impacts to people overall, to the community as a whole. So typically what minor flooding means is agricultural land could be flooded, some back roads could be flooded, low traffic roads, that type of thing could be flooded. Moderate flooding, you start getting into more paved roads and county highway flooding into possibly some outbuildings, that type of thing. So that's the type of flooding qualitatively you could kind of kind of consider to be par for the course for Missouri in the springtime.
Typically not more than a day or two?
A couple of days, right. These aren't typically long-lasting floods. They last, sometimes a week from by the time it goes above flood stage until when it drops below flood stage. So,
okay.
But right, we're not looking at long-fused, long-lasting floods.
Scott, what's your last name?
Doomer, D-U-M-M-E-R, and again, it's pronounced Doomer.
And your title?
I'm the Development and Operations Hydrologist for the Missouri Basin and River Forecast Center.
Okay. S-C-O-T-T?
Correct.
I got somebody that only uses one T, so
Oh, okay.
I always ask. Jody?
Yes, Marshall.
You are typically thinking during the navigation season that we'll be running at about 26,000 CFS?
It'll depend on the downstream conditions. Typically, as we move through the year, our releases are increased because the tributary flows decline. We're thinking as we go up next week that we'll need about 26,000 to meet the navigation targets at the beginning of the season. And again, we're having reduced support to navigation because of the low reservoir levels. And then that number will probably go up into the low 30s later in the summer. But we do have the capacity in the reservoirs to reduce releases if we get downstream rains, and I think that's critical for folks in your reach.
So you're saying you can store with this extra storage capacity?
Yeah, even without that. Yeah. We have plenty of capacity. It's not just because the reservoirs are low. The flood control capacity that's normally there is typically used for that purpose as well. But we do have the ability to reduce releases for downstream flooding. How effective that is, though, depends on, where the rain falls and how far you are from the reservoir system, because it's about probably a 4.5 to 5 day travel time down to the St. Joe area. So that does reduce the effectiveness of the reservoir operations.
Okay, I think that's all I've got today.
Okay, thanks, Marshall.
Okay, thanks, Marshall. So any other Missouri press? Okay, what about Iowa congressional delegation members? Iowa state officials? Local government? What about Iowa press? Okay, South Dakota. Are there any congressional delegation members in South Dakota that may have questions?
Yeah, this is Andrew with Congresswoman Noem's office.
Yes, go ahead.
And this would be a question for Jody and the Corps. We've obviously heard from some of our communities that are watching this with a lot of interest, and was just wondering, does the Corps have any contingency plans if runoff starts to trend above normal, or at what point would you guys start developing those?
Well, we monitor the conditions every day, so we have the ability to make changes, as we move through the spring. For example, if we would see, the snow continue to accumulate and, reach record levels, or big snows on the plain, we can immediately begin to evacuate water. And then the emergency management folks in the Corps also have contingency plans. I think they've been up there and talked to the state, over the past week. So there's a lot of planning going on, even though we don't anticipate needing a lot of those resources this year.
Okay. Is there like a threshold as far as, runoff estimates that things would move more quickly? I'm just trying to get a gauge as to whether, is there like some number that you guys have where we should start to be more concerned?
Well, in the monthly reservoir studies that we updated and posted on the web last week, we include our upper basic runoff forecast. That one includes about 41.7 million acre feet of runoff, and in that study you see that we would begin to ramp up our releases. At that point, we were looking at a water supply, so the water that's in the reservoirs plus what we expect to come in through the rest of the year. So in that study, we would begin to evacuate floodwater in the April or early May time frame. So again, we watch the forecast and look at that total water supply. It also includes the storage capacity of some of the tributary projects. So we look at all that together and then determine whether or not we need to start evacuating additional water. And at this time, we don't. In fact, as I mentioned, we won't even refill the reservoir system this year. But if conditions would turn remarkably worse, then we're ready to move on to that other plan.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any South Dakota tribes or state officials?
Michael, this is Christy Turman with the State Office of Emergency Management in South Dakota. I do have a couple of questions.
Oh, great. Go ahead.
And I think these are probably for Jody. First, we talk about drought conditions that we're still trying to refill the reservoir from the 2012 drought. Is there a trigger for when you consider drought conditions no longer exist in the system?
Well, there's a couple things that we use to say that there's still drought going on. First is that the reservoirs are still drawn down, so that isn't really a drought condition on the basin, but it's an impact in the reservoir system. So we're drawn down a little over 5 million acre-feet right now. And then we still have dry conditions in much of the lower basin. So across Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, we have drought conditions, and those are put out by the National Drought Mitigation Center, I believe. Yeah. So, we're looking at a couple different factors when we say there's drought. We're looking at the soil conditions in the lower basin and then also the reservoir conditions.
Okay, and my second question, I'm assuming that if we were looking at a flood scenario, that this weekend's mountain melt would have a positive impact on that. Is that the case? Is that true?
You mean the melt that we got last weekend?
Yeah, well, the melt that has started over this weekend. If you look up in the Montana mountains, there's a lot of flood advisories and flood warnings. I'm assuming that some of that melt happening now lessens our chance down the road of having a flood.
Right. I think that what we are seeing right now is some of the plain snowpack come off, and many of the rivers and streams are still ice covered. So when that water is coming off into those ice affected streams, we've gotten some of the lowland flooding, and maybe a little bit of the low level mountain snowpack coming off as well. And I think the answer to your question is the longer we can extend the period of melt, the better everyone will be. But I think that having intermittent periods of warmth where we lose a little bit of the snow at a time, that's a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other state officials or local government in South Dakota?
This is Brad Lawrence. I got a couple questions.
Okay, go ahead, please.
The first one is on the calculation of the deciles and quartiles. Has that been converted over to the actual skewed distribution math at this time?
I'm sorry, into the what?
Skewed distribution math rather than graphical interpretation?
I'm looking around. I don't know what that means.
The runoffs are a skewed distribution, so the math, you have to use special math to come up with the upper decile, upper quartile, those calculations. I'm curious if that's being done or if it's still being done graphically.
We develop our own runoff forecasts, and so we come up with the most likely forecast, and then we factor that runoff forecast to get the upper and lower runoff forecasts. And it does, for example, increase the most likely forecast by as much as 160% during those peak runoff months to account for what you're calling the skew in the runoff distribution, I would guess.
Okay, the second question deals with on the data sheet that was sent out. They show you have it shown as approximately 50% of the runoff would come from the mountain snowpack. So then, if that's the case, if we continue on towards the 2011 level, the trend continues, and we end up something real similar to that, we would probably then have to bump up the overall runoff forecast at that time.
Right. What that sheet that I think you're talking about, it's a key messages that we've distributed to the state folks in the past day or two. And what it talks about, and we talk about this at all our public meetings, that we typically get about 25% of our annual runoff during the months of March and April, which coincides with the melt of the plain snowpack. And then we get, on average, about 50% of it during the months of May, June, and July, which coincides with the typical runoff of the mountain snowpack. That's not actually how we necessarily distribute this year's runoff forecast. We actually are looking at the plain snowpack and the mountain snowpack and putting it into the appropriate time frames. But that just tells you what typically occurs if you look at the historic record.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any other state officials or local government from South Dakota? And if not, do we have any South Dakota press?
This is Tony Mangan at KCCR Radio in Pierre.
Hi, Tony.
How are you?
Okay.
Jody, a couple questions. Eventually, the snowpack is going to have to come through the reservoir, correct?
That's correct, Tony.
Okay. The question is there going to be any chance of even some minor flooding at all? I mean, are you thinking that there's going to be some minor flooding when that water comes through the Oahe Reservoir?
We don't anticipate any flooding along the main stem of the Missouri River between the reservoirs as a result of our releases. There could be, on some of those rivers that flow into the Missouri, minor flooding along there. And I guess I would say, also, upstream of Garrison Reservoir, we have about a 200-mile river reach, so there could be some, localized flooding, but it won't be a result of the reservoir releases like you saw in 2011.
What about, have you given any thought to how much you're going to release it at one time, the cubic feet per second? I mean, are you looking at releasing at 50,000 or 75,000 eventually? I mean...
Oh, no. We're much less than that. As we talked about I think Joel talked about, at Oahe, we expect peak releases this summer to be about 30,000 cubic feet per second. And that's really just to back up our navigation releases. We're not anticipating the need to evacuate any floodwater this year.
Are we, in your mind, you talked about the 2012 drought and the fact that the reservoirs are still down, compared to that. Are we still in a drought period? Or are we out of that yet?
The reservoir system is still suffering the effects of the drought. The upper basin does not have drought conditions. Your soils have returned to normal and, in fact, are wetter than normal. But we still do have drought conditions in the lower basin where the soils are very dry and we're seeing impacts of drought in the lower basin.
And I know a couple people, Jody, from South Dakota have already asked this question. But are you meeting, is the Corps talking to communities and states and, at this point to make contingency plans if something does go wrong?
I'll let Kim answer that.
Yeah, Tony, this is Kim Thomas.
Hi, Kim.
Hi. Hey, we have been meeting with all the state emergency management offices as well as the tribal officials and FEMA on a regular basis. We actually were just in all the states last week at face-to-face meetings. So very much open and transparent communications early here.
Yeah, do you get the impression that when you talk to them, they feel pretty good about what they're hearing at this point?
We'll have to ask them, but really everybody's on the same page. We're all understanding the situation. We got to remember that every flood is a different flood, And so just have to understand that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other South Dakota press?
Yes, this is Jerry Oster, WNAX Radio in Yankton.
Hey, go ahead.
And a question, in the flood of 2011, as we got into that event, it was the snow melt and very heavy rains upstream, and we kind of got a surprise every day. And Jody, maybe you could answer this. Do you have any different reporting methods, any different updated reaction modes as you did compared to 2011?
Well, I think there are some differences. You know, we haven't changed the overall operation of the reservoir system. We didn't update the manual or anything following the 2011 flood, but there are some things that we're doing differently. One is this increased coordination that we're having, things like this call. The second is that we do a lot more coordination now with the other federal agencies and with the state climatologist and local folks on developing our runoff forecast. And I think that's a pretty significant change. We're working with all the folks that are gathering data and making sure that we're all singing off the same sheet of music. There was a proposal developed following the 2011 flood about developing a plain snowpack and soil moisture monitoring system, and that proposal is out there. It was included, I don't remember, in either the House or the Senate version of the worded bill, but nothing has come out of that yet. But we are interested in getting better soil moisture and plain snowpack data. But in the meantime, we're doing things to address that as well. We're making sure that all the data that's collected by the states and by us is shared between the agencies. The Corps has a network of volunteers who go out during the winter and collect plain snowpack data. So we're working with that, trying to make sure that we're seeing all the conditions that are out there.
But since 2011, in terms of real-time data, that's not changed? Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. We haven't. There hasn't been any addition in the real-time data collection.
So maybe Dr. Toddy's still on the line, and if that's the case, then in plain snowpack, how do you make your estimates on that? Is it by guess or by golly or by volunteers type reporting?
Yeah, I'm still on here. What is used for plain snowpack monitoring is, as you are the co-op observer, we use the National Weather Service co-op observers getting the snowpack monitored. We have throughout the basin, and could always use more, volunteers who report snow amounts to the COCO-ROS networks, the Volunteer Precipitation Monitoring Effort. The Corps volunteers report to them, and then that data is fed along with satellite and some other data to the no-risk group, which is the map I showed you out of the Twin Cities from NOAA, that combine that data along with some aircraft flights and satellite data to get these maps. They're good. They can be better because we need better ideas of what is actually in the snow in the plains, and we need a better detail on that. That's why the issue that Jody brought up on the plain snowpack and soil moisture monitoring is so important.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions?
Jody?
Yes.
This is Jeff Dooley from Dakota Dunes.
Hi, Jeff.
You mentioned earlier in your remarks, and it's been commented about the amount of snowpack that is currently in the mountains.
Yep.
One of the things I get asked the most is what is the Corps doing differently today than it was in 2011? And you kind of answered that a little bit, but looking at your short-term release projections, to be clear, those are mainly driven by navigation and normal operating parameters, correct? And not necessarily snowpack or flood?
That's correct.
Okay. And listening to some of your answers to some of the other questions, there is a point down the road where flood considerations will start overcoming the other considerations?
That's right. If we would see, a dramatic change in basin conditions, then we would switch to a flood operation mode where we increase our releases to that serve navigation in order to evacuate any flood water that we think we're going to accumulate during the year over the longest period of time possible. So we would want to start that, as soon as we see the runoff into the reservoir system, and we would continue those higher releases clear until December.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any national press on the phone that may have questions today?
This is Paul at Yankton County.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I've got a question. During the 2011 flood, we had elevation heights of the river, based on so many cubic feet per second being released from the dam. Since the flood, has there been any effort to make new maps, LIDAR, so that LIDAR taken of the river, so that at a certain CFM we kind of know what the elevations of the river will be or could be?
Okay. This is Jody. Can you tell me where you're located at?
I'm with Yankton County Emergency Management, just below Gavin's Point.
Oh, Yankton County. Okay, I didn't hear the name of the county. We have resurveyed the reservoirs, 5 out of 6 of them since the 2011 flood. And in the river reaches, we have done some water surface profiles, and we're looking at those gauges, every day. So we know there have been some changes, and especially in the area that you're at, there's been degradation of the channel. So at the same release, we have lower stages today than we would have had before the 2011 flood.
Okay, well, are those maps available to us, or is that something we have to talk to our local out at the dam here?
Well, it's not necessarily a map. What we have, like for Yankton, is a rating curve. So we get a gauge reading off our data collection platform, and we convert that to a flow. So we have a rating curve. And I don't know that any mapping. I'm looking around. I don't think any mapping itself, like LIDAR mapping, has been done of the river since the flood.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any final questions before we adjourn?
Yeah, this is Marshall again from the News Press.
Go ahead, Marshall.
I had forgotten. Is Judd still on?
Judd, if you're on, star 6 to come off mute.
Hey, Marshall, this is Josh. Judd had to step off. Can I help you?
Oh, yeah. What have you been doing with local county emergency management people above Kansas City in looking at preparations? You said you had, I think, 4 million sandbags on hand, but have you been having any meetings with the local emergency managers yet?
Yeah, our process is a little different than Omaha. Our threat is mainly runoff after the snow melt, so we meet a little bit later in the season. We're going to meet with the state of Kansas here coming up next month, and meeting with the state of Missouri as well. Then that information gets pushed down to the locals as well. We also have some local training that we're going to do out with some of the local sponsors. This year it's going to be in Salina, and it's going to be down in New Haven, Missouri.
Okay,
so nothing
up
north this year.
Nothing up north.
Yep.
So Holt County, which seems to get a flood every year,
they're well seasoned. They're well seasoned at flood fighting.
What about Donovan County on the opposite side?
Donovan, we did flood fight training last year in Topeka, and we had some of the local sponsors come to Topeka from that area. Each year we try and do different locations in the basin, in the Kansas City basin.
Okay.
Try and provide.
That's all I've got then.
Okay, thanks, Marshall. Any other questions before we adjourn?
This is Gary Stonkert from Bismarck Emergency Management.
Ted, please.
Just a couple of quick questions for Jody. I know our main concern is probably ice jamming because of the wild card, but I was just wondering, what is the garrison capacity at right now compared to 2011? That's just kind of curious to see what the storage capacity is at the same time of year. And then the second question would be, if I know in 2011, to me, it seemed like it was the rains that, that was that third piece that really, in my opinion, made the flood happen. Where would we be if we had the same kind of rainfall, happen sometime this spring up in the Montana area and that water started coming our way? Are we still sitting okay for storage at Garrison if we would have the same kind of rain that we did in 2011?
Okay.
Hypothetical, I know, but...
that's all right. We're looking at things like that. In terms of the Garrison levels, the reservoir today is 6.4 feet lower than it was on this day in 2011. So that's part of that 5 million acre feet of additional storage capacity. The reservoir system as a whole is almost 7 million acre feet lower than it was on 2011, but that's because in 2011 we'd already started to get some runoff into the system. So we have good storage capacity in the reservoir system. And if we were to get the same sort of rains that we had in 2011, we believe that the reservoir system, because we have this extra storage plus our full flood control capacity, that we would still be in good shape. We would, if we got the 2011 runoff this year, we would have high releases, but they would be a fraction of what we experienced in 2011.
And thank you. The reason I asked is because I'm not an expert in this at all, but it seems like the Montana snowpack that we have now, or even what we had in 2011, is not necessarily unusual or record-breaking. So to me, it just seemed like that couldn't have been, the prime. I mean, it was one of three issues, I guess, like you said before. So appreciate you answering the question.
Right, and again, we are really just looking at only having one of those factors in play at the present time, and that's the mountain snowpack. Plain snowpack is light, and the other factor is the runoff. And you've heard the long-range weather forecast. We're not anticipating those record-type rains across the Upper Plains.
But if something freakish happened and we had the rain, then we'd have 2 out of those 3, which of course is still only 2 out of 3. But I was just wondering what the capacity was. So you're comfortable with if we would even have that same, that we'd still be in good shape?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Jody, this is Dennis Toddy. Just to add on to that we can't give any kind of a long-range outlook to say that something like that kind of storm in Montana in 2011 could or couldn't happen again. But from a climatological perspective, that was a freakishly large storm, where you had 50% of your annual rainfall in one event over, a half of the state or something like that. So people need to understand that about how bizarre that precipitation event really was on top of 2 other major events.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? In an effort to maintain open lines of communications, these calls will continue through July 2014, and I want to thank all of you today for participating on the call. Thanks again. We're adjourned.